Welcome to LDSBookReviews.com. My name is Ryan Daly, and for those of you who have been following this channel, yes, it is true. I shaved. A long story we won't go into here, and I apologize for the delay in jumping right back into this. I've had some books to read and to catch up on before I had more reviews to crank through. But today we're going to start off with something that many of you have heard about. Hopefully, many of you have read. It is The Saints, the Standard of Truth, the history of the church from 1815 to 1846. This is published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and is a kind of a documented history of the beginning of the church. This is the first of a multiple volume set that the church will be releasing. So this is kind of the standard now, the standard history that's given. This is the first time anything like this has kind of been done since the early 1900s, 1915, when the history of the church was published. Of course, the history of the church publication from the 1915 through the 1930 area that we all know and love, which is this multiple volume set, has some adjustments and things in it that have taken place that obviously that's a whole nother story right there. As for this book, I'm actually going to give it 4 stars. I have been impressed and disappointed at the same time, but those disappointments are my own and they are not subject to the book. This is probably the most comprehensive and concise history on the church that you could come across. What's interesting is the church has come over some scrutiny over the last 15, 20 years, probably since the early 80s, late 80s, about understanding their own history. And when you really look at it, to some extent, I don't think the church really did fully understand their own history. And so since those times, a lot of things have been discovered and a lot of things have come out in historical documents. And so there's this idea and this narrative that can sometimes be out there that the church has been secretive, or they've been, and in reality, they probably just didn't know themselves, which is ironic, right? You would think that they would understand everything about their own history. And so over the last decade, this is kind of built up in the notion that there's just a lot of things that have never been discussed, primarily because they didn't know. And so what this actually does is this seems to be a response to that need to understand the history of the church. And it covers just about every single topic you can imagine, pretty straightforward and pretty factual. It's concise, though, so it's comprehensive in that it'll cover everything. In fact, early on, there's a story about, it makes reference to Alvin being critical to obtaining the plates. And it's a brief story. It's really concise, but it's a unique story that really has never been told in a church-sanctioned document ever before. And so for those of us, in fact, a few years ago, I went back and did everything I could to find original source material for that story because I loved it so much. It took me about 18 months, and I actually found and acquired an original printing of the first time that narrative was ever shared. And so there's this sad moment when so easily it's just right there for everyone to have. And I thought I was so special, right? And so what's interesting in that is it covers it, meaning it touches on it. You're not going to get really comprehensive dialogue on each one of these issues regarding the Curling Safety Society or the fall of Zion or anything like that. What you're going to get is you're going to get a really good skim over everything that's discussed. Seer Stones, Alvin, Zion, the Curling Safety Society, what happened in Missouri, the failures and the successes. It also is going to have really great stories intermixed. And these are stories that previously the history of the church has been narrated primarily through documents of the prophets, journals of Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Wilford Woodruff, who kept meticulous records. This actually uses other source materials to help pull in the narrative, the experience that the saints actually have, while covering a lot of those topics. To some extent, kind of on an outsider's perspective, it kind of gives the church a sense of, hey, we're not hiding it. It's right here. It's being discussed. If you're not reading it, then it's not my fault. It's your fault. It kind of gives them some culpable deniability that a lot of these topics are being openly discussed and out there. So I absolutely love it. I appreciate it. There's absolutely there's moments when I'm surprised that they discuss and touch about certain topics, and then there's moments when I'm just thrilled that they do it. And so this is pretty monumental. I really appreciate the work that's gone into it. And so I do give it 4 stars on the topic. It's really great. Again, it's comprehensive in that it covers and touches upon just about everything you can imagine that you'd want the church to cover through this period, even as a historian. But it's going to touch lightly, so it's going to be very concise and just kind of pop through because there's a lot of material. So you're not going to get deep narratives, but you're not going to be surprised if you hear a narrative later on, which to me is the most important thing about where the church is at today. It's about inoculating our members of the church as well as our children in an environment that's safe, just like you would any virus or anything that could be potentially hazardous. You do it in a safe environment. And that way, when they hear about it later, they're not surprised, they're not thrown or whiplashed by it. And this is a fantastic text to start that conversation with. In fact, a lot of people, when the seer stone started to become a larger discussion, and the seer stone in the hat, right? A larger discussion. A lot of people were frustrated, and they felt like that was weird and uncomfortable. But the reality was, the narrative that you could ask them and say, well, what do you know happened? And they say, well, there was these Urim and Thummim and these glass stones, and they'd look into them, and I was like, that's weird too, guys. The only reason that's acceptable to you is you are inoculated with that story early on in your life, and you're so familiar with it that it's okay. And so it's important for us as members of the church to become familiar with these topics so that, and just become familiar with them. You don't have to be specialists. That way, your kids and the people you teach aren't surprised when they go on Wikipedia or they go to college or they go to school. And so this text to me is pretty paramount towards that end. So I'm really excited about it. I'm thrilled about it. It's not going to make you a phenomenally stronger member of the church. So it's not a 5-star book, but it is a 4-star in the general context, right? Of giving you a good overview that's pretty easy to embrace. So with that, I'm going to give The Saints by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the very first volume in this 4-star review. I recommend everyone to go get it. It is cheap. It is affordable. You can listen to it on the church's app, and that's a pretty good way to go through it as well. So with that, I leave you guys. Please follow my page, and we will talk to you later. Thanks.